Welcome back to Pop-Up Presentations 2024 edition. We are going to continue my sort of field of focus, so the strategy and pick lists and all that sort of thing. The data that's available to teams is much higher than it's ever been, and it's going to continue to go that way. But with data comes problems of confidence intervals, how confident you should be, how confident you have to be to make decisions during an event. So something I didn't introduce last week with the new version of the pop-up presentations is what my aim is in doing these. These are focused on making sure that my team, 2910 new and old students, get the information that's in my head into theirs, because we only meet for so many hours, and I don't think it's fair for me to say that this is a mandatory meeting, these like 2.5-2 hour long presentations that I have. So in their own time, they can watch it, not live, probably sped up if you're not watching it live. And not just my team, but these are the things that I'm noticing, and there is definitely an agenda here when it comes to preparing for the 2025 changes to alliance selection. I'm going to put forth what I want teams to do because it'll make my life easier. And if everybody follows that, I'll be happier. And if you don't, I don't know, we'll find a way to work around it. But I think that there's some real opportunity here. And I'd like to put the stake in the ground early so that we're not just doing old style picking, but now with a timer and more people on the field. So at events, the people who are fixing the robot, improving the robot, helping other teams, all of these people on your team, they're doing something for a reason. What are they doing? So we're going to start this presentation with a lot of these are the things that make up different parts of a competition from the scouting and strategy standpoint. And then we'll get into some of the theoretical stuff. But one of the things that we have on 2910 as a structural advantage is a relatively large team. We have enough people that we do have 12 scouts for every match. So we use our resources to try to leverage, like a match happens and there's a certain amount of stuff that happens during it, and you got to watch it. And there are so many matches that it's really hard to do non-live data collection and have that be a robust system, because then you got people up till all hours of the night. So we have a set of qualitative scouts and a set of quantitative scouts, and then we have leads on top of that and people trying to parse this information and all this. So not everything is applicable to every sort of structure of team, but this is kind of what we are trying to do with that many people on our team. You got 6 robots. You have almost every team that's scouting, hopefully. You have enough people on your team that you have a scout per robot, which is more than each match has referees per robot. That's why referees have quadrants. But there are more things that happen during the match than you're able to see, but you try to get those closer to each other. In one direction, by having more people watch the match, more people watch the actions that happen during the match. And from the other direction, by saying, these are the things that are happening during the match that we aren't recording, that we aren't paying attention to. But your team collectively has to get all the information that you need out of that match. It's not simple. It is, and it is hard. But that's like the quadrant that you don't want to be in. You want simple, complicated, easy, hard. It's complicated and hard. Great. Just where everybody loves to be. But my aim overall is to shift it slightly farther toward the center there, because you can certainly do a lot of work when it comes to developing match strategy and developing pick lists. You can do practically an infinite amount of work. The amount of time that you have from before the competition until you get to these inflection points, you can spend all of that time on this. So let's try to get a little bit more efficient. Try to get that information where it needs, just the information that you need into the places that it needs to go. You want everybody to be prepared. So your drive coach and drive team has what they need to execute during the match, their partner information and opponent information and field information, so that your match strategy does what the team needs. You need to have your pick lists ready. So you need to be collecting stuff to get toward what you need there. And you need to be able to do this robustly so that you're not just doing everything ad hoc and trusting the people in the moment to make these decisions. You want to set them up to succeed. There is an amount of time, and you do have a lot of resources that can be funneled toward this. So funnel it. Don't just keep it silent. Well, keeping it silent is a different thing, but don't keep things at the same width of bandwidth for every single person. It's too much. I mean, Woody Flowers was fond of saying it's a fire hose, but trying to lessen that slightly, I think, benefits everybody. So you're watching every match, or for the majority of every event, you're watching every match, you're doing stuff. Each of the teams has attributes that they are demonstrating on the field. Robots often start in the same place. If they don't, that's an interesting thing for you to note. If they have autonomous modes that start in different places that do the same thing or different things. Pretty basic stuff. I want to do the basics of this, kind of trying to describe the nuts and bolts of it. So each robot is out there for autonomous, they're out there for teleop, and then for the portion of teleop that is endgame. So right before autonomous, you can see where they start. During autonomous, you can see where they go, what they interact with. And for most games, how many game pieces they pick up, how many game pieces they score. Teleop, there's way more than that. Auto is intentionally simplified. Well, there are elements of interaction that aren't in autonomous modes in modern FRC games. They've mostly disallowed defense. There are certain things in certain games, but if a game is highly defensive, it probably isn't during autonomous. That's something that you can use to try to pick out, this team is able to do this when they're being unfettered. And so that can be a really useful piece of information. Autonomous is also often bonus points, so you do want to maximize those points that you can't get during the rest of the match. That's something that I like to keep going back to. But during the match, you're watching each robot go and do stuff, and you're tracking how many stuff they do, the stuff that you care about. And then you take all that stuff and you put it into a system. Now, I think that there are very many ways to do this. There are very many ways to do every aspect of match strategy and pick lists and overall event strategy. And by and large, if your aim is to win the competition, which most teams it is, and if you're looking at how do you optimize your scouting, it is to do stuff like this. How do you win the event? You do care about similar things as everybody. So you'll see different scouting systems and all of that. But if your aim is that, by and large, how you go about doing that, there isn't, in my mind, a moral relative weight on that. You can make different decisions. You can prioritize different things. You can pick out different parts of the match that you care about, different attributes of teams as they demonstrate with their robots during the match. All of these things. I don't value one team over another because they've made these decisions. And then teams that are out there, when we rank teams, you have to rank teams. You have to have loose or strict structures of where you consider these teams relative to each other. None of that is a moral judgment. Can't say that enough. Especially as later in this presentation, I'm going to be showing our actual pick lists from events. Try to keep that in mind. None of this is an indictment or an endorsement of any team in what they did. It's really just, in these matches, what did these robots do, and how does that help us at this event reached the goal of the event. It's value judgments that are moral value judgments. So you take all of this information, you put it into whatever system you want. On 190, the team that I grew up with and mentored for many years, my preferred scouting system was everybody had these little 3-inch notebooks, and they would take one line of those 3-inch notebooks. They'd write down the team number, a letter that designated where they started in auto, then tick marks for how many things they scored, and then a tiny section right at the end for some sort of scribbling notes. And then each person would turn around to the person with the Excel sheet on their laptop, and they would relay the information after the match to the person in the Excel sheet to be inputted into our combined thing. It was slow, but there was immediate data validation, or not real validation, but at least a little bit of, oh, this, you sure about that number? A little bit of back and forth, and everybody who was scouting that match would get to hear what every team had done. It's very low tech. It's very slow. It's not very, but within that Excel sheet, mean, median, mode, highest scores of this, and different ways of taking those data and putting them into our lists as we'd use them. But Scantron, QR code readers, other sheets that you take a picture of and it pulls the information out of that picture. I don't know the best way to do it. We've been doing a QR system the past couple of years. That part of the system has worked for quantitative data. You want to get the information after every match and put it into the information bucket sorting machine. I think it's worthwhile to do that every match. I don't really think that batch inputting works. The only time that we've done that have been times when the system is failing. I think that if you wait too long, you're just not going to catch errors as they come. And on a side note, so I have an aversion to mirrored fields. I don't like them. But exacerbating the mirrored field issue this year in Crescendo was where the amp was. You couldn't see robots scoring. And you couldn't see where robots started. If you had only one set of bleachers, it was on the audience side, which is where the amp was. You couldn't see where robots started. So you're up there in the stands, hoping that your robot moves first, and then you glean from that where they had started on the subwoofer. A little bit of thought toward our poor viewers, I think, might be warranted for FRC game design, because I think most viewers of matches might be remote, and I would like to see that actually come in a little bit. Several teams at the end of 2021 were talking about with the proliferation of the first webcast unit, so every regional has very standardized video, and most districts are trying to do very similar camera and viewing setups. So there are venues that would be more appropriate for FRC competitions, except bleacher space. If that's your limitation, then the ability to have another room in the building that has a hardline feed that you could just have all the extra scouts. If you had a bunch of scouts that were just watching the video feed and they could see what they need to see on a full field view that's big enough, that's actually focused on the right things, you could alleviate some of these space concerns. And some teams were looking at doing that as we were coming out of the COVID lockdowns. I don't know if any of them have moved to that wholesale. I know that Mechanical Advantage for Chezy this year had many remote members helping out scouting, and that's smart. I mean, they had to. If you have to travel, and you have people on your team that want to be active, the ability to do some of the work that you do at events remotely is pretty cool. I like hybrid meetings. I wish we actually learned and implemented more of the lessons that we could have learned from the just past lockdown era. Another thing about this presentation, this one's going to be hopping around a lot. The structure of this, the structure of what you need. You need to be, I think that you need to be starting the conception of your pick list when you start watching matches at an event, if not before. You should have the concept of what are we looking for in our partners, and then you can adjust that as you go. But you should be able to pretty quickly look at these are the attributes that we want to value. You should have that in your scouting sheets. But throughout an event, you're doing work that only shows up at later moments during an event. So that's my justification for why this presentation is less structured. So yes, I talked about tick marks, how you do it. It is extremely important before events and in between events, and hopefully you don't have to do it at events, to decide what you are recording. You want to know start positions, because if you have incompatible auto start positions, there might not be a graceful way out of that. You might have somebody who just doesn't have an auto. If your auto is better than theirs, but you like the rest of their attributes, you just say start in a legal starting position and don't run anything. It's not the most optimized, so you want to pick out those things if the auto is valued highly enough. Whatever you're doing when you're watching these matches, you do have to get into even your quantitative scouts. You do have to get into some subjective judgments. So an example of this, in 2023, Charged Up was a nightmare to scout. Like, everybody reported issues of data quality. We would have 19 game pieces scored, and then we would look at the match report for that, and that did not match how many game pieces were scored in that match. So we eventually got to the point where we were describing the main thing that we were recording as game pieces taken from outside of the community to inside of the community, which is pretty broad, but was actually what we were trying to track. It was how many things are you getting into a scoring position, because you had cubes that could just be pushed in while you were doing other scoring tasks. And even more so once you got to the post-district championship version of Charged Up, which was a fundamentally slightly different game. So there's an element of that. Like you would have, if you were recording passing this year, what was a successful pass versus one that wasn't? If you're just ticking off, if you're saying 1, 2, 3, 4, are all 4 of those the same? You have to figure out what you consider to be one of these scores. Some games it's straightforward, like 2022 Rapid React. Did they score in the upper hub? Did the cargo go in and stay in and get counted by the sensor? Other things that you're trying to record might be more inherently subjective. And if you are watching a team that's playing defense, qualitative and quantitative scouts, qual and quant scouts, do have to have there has to be a collective understanding of the things that you would use to describe their defense. Good, bad, okay, whatever that is. If different people have different definitions of that, you have to figure that out quickly and get those to be square. Otherwise, you can't directly compare teams, because from a couple of slides ago, one person is not going to watch every team in every match. Even if you juice up those YouTube speeds, watching them at 2x, or you download them and play them in a player faster than 2x, that's a lot. That is a lot of watching, and I don't recommend doing it. So try to get everybody on the same page with this counts for this means this. Whatever you're recording, make sure that everybody is recording it the same. And when you are the things you are recording, you can say, it might be simple, and it's done, to say, the first thing that we're ranking these teams on is how many game pieces they score in the high goal in teleop. Within that can be pretty close to objective, but you've just made a subjective decision by saying that's the thing that you're focused on recording and ranking teams on. So every objective stat reveals a subjective decision to care about that. I get into this later as well. And you can display this. We use Tableau. We may or may not use it next year, depending on who actually knows how to use it. You can display these data in different ways. I got used to just looking at the parts of the Excel sheet that had the numbers that I remembered where they were. So I would compare those numbers in my mind. You can also do it visually. You can have graphs. This graph from, gosh, I don't know what year, 2022 maybe? Sorry, I cannibalized some of my my internal 2910 scouting and match strategy presentation from last year and then expanded on it a lot. So I don't know how that cannibalization metaphor works. But you can have it broken down like this, where you have overall points and then it's broken up into components, auto, end game, telly up. So then you can look at it, you can have it sorted this way, which is just total points. You could also have it sorted by one of the components or each of the components in succession, and you could look at those different graphs depending on what you care about. You can have whatever the heck this graph was showing. Lots of auto score for 2910 over here, and lots of end game score for 48.9 and 37.11. Sorry, this was the year before I joined the PNW, so I don't recognize all of these team numbers inherently, but this might be something that would be useful, because if you're looking at a set of bar graphs like this, you might not see you won't be able to see what this graph is trying to show you, which is, given the average team at this event, how far outside of the norm on each of these things is this team. So visualizing the data can be useful so that more than one person can look at it and start to draw conclusions from where things show up. Most of the stuff that you're collecting is just from what teams do on the field. It's not just where most of the data are, it's also where you should be getting that, because a team will do on the field mostly what they have shown that they are capable of doing on the field, but there's way more information that you can pull out. Games where you care about how robots are shaped or specific attributes of robots or teams that won't be captured from a distance. So years where you have to buddy climb, or you all have to fit on the same platform to do something, you might really want to know, are these teams all the same? Are their chassis all the same width, or is one of them 3 inches less wide? And is within the group of teams that we're considering for this? Because that might be something that tips them over into, oh, this is actually a really attractive feature that they have, that you only see the secondary effects of during matches, but you can take the direct information out by doing pit scouting, which has been much maligned over the years. That one, even more so than match scouting, you have to have a really clear idea of what you're trying to get out of it. And yes, I am in favor of starting your pit scouting with one very strange question. I think the one I've heard most often is, if your robot were a flavor of ice cream, what flavor would that be? Which gets, but it's almost an icebreaker. It's a good way to ease into your very specific measurement questions. You also want to have each match you have your match strategy for, depending on which teams are in it, yours and your opponent's, mostly yours. And those are informed by the data that you collect. Well, before the first couple of matches are played, are you just going to give your strategy people and your drive coach a blank sheet of paper and say, go strategize? Pre-event scouting, if you can keep it focused and just on the things that you really need to be able to form those first couple of match strategy sheets, it can be very powerful. If you use it too much, you can get into trouble. Not picking out any team in particular here. And there are the things that the robots do. And when you look at your match schedule, you say, based on what we know about these teams, this is our strength of schedule. This is how good our alliances are compared to our opponents' alliances. And you can look at other teams and how theirs go, all of this stuff. So match data doesn't just happen to you. You don't just collect it. You use some of it to influence how the matches that you're playing in go. So some of it is, we noticed that this team in most of their matches is trying to do this, but they're better at doing this other thing. Then in our match, rather than doing the thing that they've mostly been doing, which isn't effective, we have them do the thing that they do occasionally, which is more effective. So that change, like the strength of schedule, you're not able to pull out that kind of information just from this team does a number. And what we refer to as the strike team, or we have a bunch of different names for it. It was the Baby Cobra strike team from 2009 and 190 because our robot was shaped like a snake, so like a snake that rears up, so Cobra. So at our second event, it was most of the teams there first event, and it was the first year of the Creo, the new control system. So there were a lot of growing pains, and we'd gone through some of them at our first event. And at our second event, our robot didn't break. 2009, the Lunacy game was one that didn't introduce many forces into your robot. Every collision was elastic. So you could slam full speed into another robot. Also, this is when motors were worse. Nobody was going super fast. But you were also slipping on the thing. You could go full speed into somebody. And you could both just kind of smush into each other and bounce off. So, and it was a ball shooting or dumping game. So there weren't big lever arms anywhere. So you got to a point where if you ran your robot for a while, until you got to wear items, like things that could only run for so long before they had to be replaced, most of the time your robot didn't break. So we were at that point at our second event, and a lot of teams weren't. And we had people who would normally be fixing our robot just going around to other teams. You've seen this in Citrus Service and Chezy Cares, whatever 254 calls it. These group, like a part of your team that goes around to check up on other teams, see if there's anything they can help fix, any insight that they can give, sort of trying to raise all boats. You can manipulate the data by changing the attributes of teams throughout the event. Nobody's static. And teams can do that by themselves as well. But whatever you see, when you look at your match schedule and you go, oh, this is a rough match schedule, you can also look at it as, people think that this is a rough match schedule. I'm going to change that. Now, that's how you can get these really, these events that aren't projected to go well for you. You can change that, not just with how you play your robot on the field, but also how you help your partners and other teams at the event play to their potential. So this is an example of a 2023 match strategy sheet that we would get from the scouting team to go to the match strategy person so that they would work that out with our partners to try to, I don't know, score the most points, whatever you're supposed to do in 2023. Did not like that game. But these are showing auto game pieces, teleop game pieces, end game charge station success rate. Is that really what it was? Anyway, whatever's on this sheet, whoever's reading it actually knows how to read it, and they can glean from this, we should have this team be doing this. So the information, like live during the event, the information that's being collected by the scouts goes into something like this, that's given to somebody to try to construct a match strategy out of. And they would have they will have a board upon which they draw. And you put the teams in where their player stations are, then you draw the little robots where they start in auto, then you start drawing other lines, and then you get into these, what I call 4D drawings, because You draw a robot in a place, and then you draw a robot in another place that happens at a different time, but it's still one sheet. So you have to remember what order things were actually drawn to be able to understand. This is a Stronghold 2016 version, so you would draw, or whoever was using this sheet would write in which defense was in which place on the defense's bar, and then where people were, and then draw out where they wanted teams to be. A simpler version of that for 2023 had the zones where you would start. You could do auto, and then you'd be a dry erase setup or whatever you had. I don't know if you had a bunch of sheets that you would just flip through and tear off, or write in pencil in a big eraser. And so the top part of this is a top-down view of the field, and then the bottom part of this weird thing that my face is slightly occluding, is the grid as looked at, or as represented from a robot perspective. So looking at the player stations. So you could get into, we want you to score the top row from the left to right, or the bottom row from center out, whatever. And you would draw. So we did this. We drew the paths that our robots would take at the 2023 Indiana Robotics Invitational, because we wanted to not be in each other's way. And we used the bottom grid to draw out where game pieces would be after auto, assuming we scored where we intended to. So from this, before every match, we would say, do we want to adjust any of these paths so that we're less in each other's way, or there's something their opponents are doing? So you do want to have a visual markup so that you have something to reference when you're talking about changes that you want to make. If you have nothing to show anybody, then it's hard to adjust things in your mind. So that's what you do as you are slogging through all of the matches and slogging through. It's enjoyable technically. I don't know. Parts of it are, you get into some combination of a rhythm and sort of a march towards something. You can be improving as you go. You can be fixing problems. You can be just trying to maximize something that you're just capturing in the moment for all of these matches that you're doing. So you have your whole team working. Your drive team is trying to execute on the field. Your match strategist is trying to keep them executing on the field. You have your scouts feeding data in so that the match strategist is ready. But you also have this thing lurking in the background, because the structure of FRC events, which based on the blog about the alliance selection changes for 2025, this part of the structure isn't changing in the near future. Teams play a certain number of qualification matches, then they are ranked at the end of those. Then there is an alliance selection where they pick their partners for playoffs, and then they play with those partners for playoffs, because the qualification matches are randomly paired. And there are so many rules or guidelines for how the match scheduling algorithm works, so that teams don't play too many close together matches in terms of time, so that they see as many. It's in the manual. All of this stuff, and some years are better than others with those, and some events are structured better than others. So we see the gamut. We're a district team. So we go to district events that have low 30s or mid 30s number of teams. Most districts try not to go above 40. But districts always do, or they try to, and only if the event, something has messed with the schedule in an unexpected way, do they not do 12 qualification matches. So a big advantage in that is a subtle thing about qualification matches is if you don't have a number of matches divisible by the number of slots in matches and the number of teams there, then you have surrogate matches, which is a team plays their third match and it doesn't count for them. And it's marked in the schedule with an asterisk. No district teams know about this, because with 12 matches, that 12 is divisible by 6 teams in the match. The math will always work out so that everybody plays 12 matches to get to it. So those rankings happen at small events, or they're not small events. There are really small events. 2022, there was a regional, Arkansas regional had 19 teams at it. So you get into the smaller. Aside from all that, so district events somewhere between 30 and 40 teams, almost all of them. We play those events, and the amount of time in between matches is short enough that you're not going out to the practice field to do stuff, but it's long enough that you're not just staying in queue line. We go all the way to the World Championships usually with its 80 or 75 or whatever team divisions, and you have these massive breaks in between your matches. You have to. There are so many teams that have to play, and unless you lock teams into only playing the same number of teams, you have to have some variance in the gaps in between your matches. Sometimes you have a 14 match gap, and it's over lunch, so it's just came off the field, everything. We're rip roaring to go. When do we play next? 3 hours from now. Yay, championships! You do want to be prepared for what are you going to do in between matches. Sorry, this is not this part of the presentation, but what is your plan for short match turnarounds and long match turnarounds? Shout out our previous pop-up presentation from last year, between match stuff. Systems check yourself before you wreck yourself. It's still on our live page. You can watch that one. We go over some of the stuff, some of the changes you would make based on short turnarounds and long turnarounds. But back to the structure of an event. So all throughout, you're trying to do your best to seed high, to show off whatever will get you farthest in the tournament structure. But you are also forming your pick list, because alliance selections, events are won and lost, and blah, 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 all of that stuff. You have to be able to do some of this stuff without all of the data that you will have by the end of it. Most events, except for Michigan State Championships and Championships, there are matches that happen after the last night, before the last day of competition. Most district events, you have 2, 3, maybe 4 matches on your second day. So multiply that by the number of teams there. You have only a portion of the data that you're going to have. Some games lend themselves to, there's a lot of stuff that these teams did every match, and some games less so. If it's a game where there's high capacity, so this is not applicable to Reefscape, because we already know that you can only hold one of each game piece at a time. But in those high capacity games, it can be the sort of thing where they only did 3 cycles, but each time they scored a whole bunch of points. So if in the next match they do 1 cycle, that's a pretty big jump in terms of overall output, but it might be pretty close to what they were able to do with 3. If it's a many cycles game, if you were a passer this year and you're passing 15 plus notes a match, if you start to see that trend away and they're getting a lot of matches with well below their original, their number that you had them pegged at, then you do have to do something with that. That's new information. They're no longer doing what we expect them to do. And when you are evaluating teams, you can't use all of the rules that FRC has a lot of sports elements to it. But if you look at, I'm using some of the Major League American sports for this, like the MLB baseball, which is almost over this year, thankfully. They have 162 games, 9 innings of 3 outs, and however many strikes and balls you can have within it. There's so many points of data. It's absurd how many, when they get into baseball sabermetrics, into their advanced statistics, they're working from a lot of information. And most people who play baseball play at relatively similar levels year to year. This is also somewhat true for FRC teams. Well, most teams perform at similar levels most years. But there's way less of a correlation than there is in professional sports. In professional sports that have long careers, like people who have been playing at a high level for a long time, you can project what they're going to do, and within a confidence band that's relatively small. FRC teams, I would recommend, make that band pretty wide. There are correlations, but it's not based on what they did last year, because last year's game isn't this year's game. Lots of similar things from last year will succeed for you this year, but not necessarily the mechanisms or the specific things that the robots or the teams were doing. So when it comes to figuring out how to apply lessons learned in these big data-driven professional sports management styles. So general managers who have leaned into what they call analytics. What is the information that they're using, the crumbs that they're leaving out for people to take and internalize? I think the most that you can apply those is in picking lower your second and third round of teams. That's not necessarily useful for your first round teams, but kind of trying to learn these lessons of undervalued and overvalued. I do think that there is something that FRC teams can get out of this is an attribute that is being undervalued by the community or other teams at this event at large, and you can get something out of that. I don't think that applies too much to first round picks at almost every competition. It's not about overvalue or undervalue, it's just the value. So when I'm talking about using the information that they're giving you on the field, teams will do slightly different things in playoffs than they did in qualification. But I want to emphasize this slightly. Like, you can't expect a team to all of a sudden be able to do something that they've never shown you on the field. This is the incongruence, the example of incongruence that's always brought up with pit scouting. Oh yeah, we can score in the trap. Well, when you compare what they say they are able to do with what you have recorded based on what you've seen their robot do in matches, if they don't score in the trap, they can say that they do, but you have no evidence of that. So from a practical standpoint, when you are assigning attributes to teams based on the information that you've gleaned from events, I think it's most worthwhile to say only based on what they've done in matches. Otherwise, they're not able to do it. Sort of on the opposite end of that, most modern games, and actually most games before that, but older games that I've watched, when you are picking a team for defense, it is not most games, it's not most robots, it's not most events where you are picking a team to play defense based on the defense that they played in qualification matches. And that's way more true now because of brushless motor swerve. Most good defenders now are really good offensive robots. It's just who controls the robot well, robots that have been shown to be robust. So similar robot mobility, all the COT swerve that are out there, mean that it's mostly about the attributes that a robot and a team have that aren't just what they have shown in the match, about what they have shown being able to play defense in qualification matches. There are lots of other things that have to go into your evaluation of whether they'll be able to play defense. Um, that's something that is the exact opposite to what I would consider for can a team score this way. But one of the things that you can do when you are evaluating what each team has done on the field is say each match that they're trying to do this aspect of the game, that's not it. Like it's not working for them. But when we've seen them do this one small aspect of the game, they look pretty good at that. That's something that you should take all the way into your alliance. Because if you don't have to have them do the thing that they are really stretching themselves to barely be able to do, and if they're just working on something that they're quite good at, but they can't do in qualifications because it's not valued in qualifications, picking those out, very useful. But you do have to consider not to equate every team. Oh, so we see that this team is able to do this small aspect of it well, and this team that only does that is able to do the same aspect at the same level. Each team has attributes beyond what small role that you're trying to put them into in playoffs. And the old boxer, like professional boxing thing, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You don't have to get punched in FRC. You just have to, whatever. There are other phrases about this in various books about conflicts, but your strategy that you plan for when you create your alliance, unless it's inherently robust or the alliances that you're playing against can't break you out of that strategy, you have to have some sort of counter. You have to be able to have each of the robots in your alliance do something ever so slightly different than the absolute simplest thing that you would have them ranked by. When you're forming your alliance, you should be able to say, this is what our alliance is going to do to win matches. That is much more important. That's the first thing, it's the first question that you have to answer. Well before you answer the question, how do we beat this particular alliance? Because that might not matter. Your alliance has to be functional before you start worrying about how to make other alliances dysfunctional against yours. And a very straightforward set of heuristics that you should have. No, that's not right. But your plan should have what you're going to do in every match and what you do in each of those matches if this one anticipated thing happens. Our alliance plays like this. If they play defense on one of our robots, we change it up into this. That's enough for you to be ready for the first counter, the first thing that would disrupt you. You want to have that question answered when you're forming your alliance. You don't want to go 3 or 4 steps into it. Our alliance plays like this. If they defend us, we play in plan B. Then when they do this about plan B, we do this plan C. And then if you're that deep into it, you're probably not getting a robust answer to plan A, which is way more important. Most alliances in FRC are unable to execute their plan A to the point where any other plans matter. We're getting better. All the teams are getting better. So we're getting closer to that. But you're probably losing because you aren't able to do your planned strategy, not because of what your opponents are doing in a set of counters to your strategy. So when you're considering what this alliance will look like, what I like to do is split teams into tiers, into groups of teams that you directly compare. So this was easier in 2023 when we were mostly talking about, or we had gotten to the point where we were looking at the first order sort of teams as game pieces introduced into the community that weren't there before. However, I don't know, we had a better word for it at the time. I don't remember what it was. But we didn't have that many different lists, and I'll get into different lists when I talk about other games. But within, we had all the teams at IRI in 2023 ranked in order by our first sort. And then we said, this group of, here's a cutoff, 8. This group of 8 is tier 1. This next group of 8 or 7 is tier 2, and so on and so forth. And the idea with those tier lists is we think that there is a meaningful difference between every team within this tier and every team within this tier. Within those tiers, we think that it's relatively easy to move these teams around. This team may well be above this other team, even if we have them listed the other way. You should be able to move those easily. If you want to move a team from one tier to another, that should be a bigger discussion. It's, in our estimation, all of the teams in this tier, we prefer to all of the teams in this tier. But within those tiers, it's a lot easier to look at this. And I'll make a culpa about our 2023 first order sort for IRI. I used EPA, which doesn't update after championships. So our first order sort was based on data not collected at the event. We didn't have enough people to do quantitative scouting. So we were just watching teams and starting with the list, and then we had to move them around based on what we had seen at the event. But your first order sort to do these tier lists should be automatic. And then I think your second and third, whichever things that you have decided are the most important attributes that would give you thresholds of, we are considering all teams that are able to do this, whether it's a certain number of game pieces or they can do this in auto, et cetera, et cetera. Within your rankings, a certain amount of that should be just done automatically so that you have a list that you can start manipulating. If you start with a blank piece of paper, it's very hard to make a pick list. But if you start with, well, this is ordered by tele-up game pieces, auto game pieces, auto engage, end game, maybe, for whatever we had for this. These columns aren't in order. But then you can look at the lists that your data allows you to spit out. And all of the stuff that you've collected based on what your team overall values in partners, you should have this list that says, based on what you've told me, these data point to, this is the ordered, ranked. These are the teams. And it's easy in games like 2023 when there weren't very many specialists from the way that we described how teams scored. Even if your robot moved cubes into the community by just pushing them over the charge station, that was what we counted an equivalent to a game piece, like how we would do. We would drive up to the double substation shelf, pick it up off the shelf, then drive over to the node and deliver it directly into the node. Our first order sort, not directly at IRI because we were doing a shortcut, but our first order sort would rank those just based on each of those actions was equivalent. Actually, the other thing that we used as a threshold as an order sort was where they picked game pieces up from, which is a different answer than those. So that's how we got to the point where our alliance was constructed. We had 2910 picked up from the double substation, 2056 picked up from the single substation, the floor in front of it, for cones, and 1923 could pick up from the end of the protected zone with cubes that were whipped out of the chute. So we wouldn't be in each other's way for those pickup locations. So in a game like 2023, you'd really care about something like that. In 2024 Crescendo, you could get yourself into a position where you're recording where they're picking game pieces up from, especially as the game evolved. If teams were doing like full field cycles for a lot of the season before the whole passing meta evolved, you might care that this team prefers the what was that protected zone called? The human players that pushed the notes onto the field. There was one farther and one closer to you. If a team preferred one, they preferred to be against the wall, they preferred to go to the stage. If you were doing mostly cycles, or even if you were picking between passers who had a preference for where they wanted to pass from, that's something that you would care about. So, depending on the makeup of your alliance, these things could matter. They also could not. You could have an alliance where we don't care. Or we're just doing full field cycles, or we think that that's going to be one of our stronger match plans. So then, if one of the teams that we're considering seems to have a preference for which human player station they pick up from, that does not affect our plans. Sorry, I told you this was going to get theoretical. We're going to get really theoretical. So after you've done these auto sorts the way that I want you to, this is our pick list from 2023 Glacier Peak. So after you've done all of the automatic stuff, there is a point at which you have to say, yeah, all right, this is what we have previously determined to be the on-field contributions of these teams in order. But when we look at the match, we don't see it the same way. We want to move these teams around. You definitely want to have the amount of confidence to say, we are going to override our data. You have to be able to do that because data is inherently something that you are limiting. You are trying to take a lot of information and condense it into something pretty small. This is a good time for a question. What's up?
Cool. How do you determine those cutoffs for later rounds at competitions where a majority of teams are performing the same?
Okay, the question was, how do you determine those cutoffs for what I was talking about, tiers, for later rounds, like teams that you're considering in the later rounds of picking, at competitions where a lot of them are the same? That was the question. So I am going to address that with a couple of specific examples later, but that question is, that's like the hard part, is if all of the information that you have is leaving you with a bunch of teams that have that output the same, like these all score between 5 and 6 game pieces every match, and everything else is equal, then structurally, it would behoove you, it would be best if you could find something else that you can collect that will differentiate those teams. So this happens in a lot of games. This happens in most games. You just kind of, I really want to know every team's story. I want to know why they made the decisions that they made. I want to know what they're doing out there, what resources they have. I want to know every team's story of how they did stuff. That's hard. It would take a lot of time. But when you're scouting, you can't get that information. You just try to pull out of the match. So some of these things aren't like most games. You come into this problem where so many teams have what look like equivalent attributes. The first thing that we look at to differentiate those teams is pit scouting, is what we do with our strike team. It's The thing that a lot of teams say, they send experienced mechanical and programming people to look at the robot in detail in their pits when they're doing practice field stuff, when they're doing stuff not on the field. Teams have talked about, Karthik, and I guess Papathy has talked about, yeah, he does have something in his mind where he looks at, are their bumpers good? Like, are they able to do attention to detail stuff? But in a practical sense, the first thing that we look at after all of the stuff that we're getting out of match data is this team's robot going to break during a match? And some of that is stuff that you get from, we see them in matches, this team's breaking, this team isn't. You should definitely be recording that. Do they have short disconnects, long disconnects? Do they have it often? These are all things that you can influence, by the way. That's what I'm talking about in the Chezy Cares and the Citrus Service and Strike Team, whatever else you want to call it. Removing those breaks, those disconnects. Consistency is king for third picks. It can be build quality. Some teams value build quality when they're looking at this because they're saying, I have a trust in this robot. I like the way that it's put together. I think it's going to hold up. You can watch teams. This is harder stuff. You need to expend more resources to be able to differentiate these teams. You can look at how, and this gets into which things you care about. So we have, over the past couple of years, valued our own systems checks and pre-match readiness sort of things more highly. So if you're looking at, if you have the opportunity to look at this set of teams that you're seeing are performing about the same on the field, if you have an opportunity to watch them as they interact with their robot off the field, do they do a robust systems check? Are they zip tying their battery connector closed after they've set it up? Do they have more than 2 batteries? Are they doing proper battery checks with some battery beak or better? Each of these, look at their wiring. Is there hot glue everywhere? Is it a solid block of hot glue? There's a band, a bell curve that you want. You want hot glue. There are some connectors on parts of teams' electrical systems that they are thirsty for hot glue. They need a certain amount of it. Otherwise, they're parched. But too much hot glue, and they can't, this analogy is not working. Too much hot glue, and you can't get to stuff, and it breaks connectors. It can be all of that sort of stuff. You have to find more data that differentiates these teams. Until I contradict that later in the thing, which is actually, I introduced that concept in this slide. So you are going to get to a point, pick list meeting or later, where you have a set of teams that's above we think that we can make a successful alliance with this set of teams. And then within that group, within that tier, you don't have a lot of things differentiating them. You might not. You might find a couple of things, push these up to the top, push these out of this tier, push them out of the tier up or down, whatever. You should do that if you can. The next thing is you're talking about the second round. So you have a partner. You're talking about the third round. You have 2 partners. Are there preferences that they have that make sense to you? Do they have one of these teams ranked way higher than the other ones on your list? If it makes any sense to you, great. That's the differentiator. That's honestly all you need. If you trust this team, which, I mean, you picked them, or they picked you, and you're looking at your list and you're looking at their list, and they have this one team way out of whack with yours. If their explanation for that makes sense to you, that can be the thing, the information that you use to differentiate these teams. And locked order. So that I'm talking about, you do your pick list meeting, then you have the morning of qualification matches right before 8 minutes before you get to alliance selections on the second day. Whatever you come up with in your pick list meeting, that order had better not be locked. There's so much more information. There's a half a day left before you even get to alliance selections. Teams, you'd better have the confidence to be able to move teams within tiers, without tiers, like based on new information that comes out. You don't want to wildly swing and just, oh, our pick list's like this, and then after three total matches, not three matches per team, on the second day after three matches, you're like, each of our teams has moved like 8 numbers on our pick list. It can't be so loose, but you do want to be able to say, this is worrying, this is really encouraging, and move teams around as new stuff happens whenever you come up with your pick list. So in games that aren't crescendo, or sorry, games that aren't charged up, they did this thing. They always do this. It's always been a complaint. So at the very least, they didn't have different names for the cube and the cone in charged up, but they both start with C. Power Up, one of my favorite game ever. The two places you scored, two of the places that you scored were the scale and the switch. If things start with the same letter, at least in my experience in English, you get confused about them. So, sorry. In charged up, you could get to a point where you had one list. It was basically all you cared about was how many game pieces. It's like once you could supercharge, you could just keep going. You really needed to be able to pump that number up. Now, in charged up, and in most other games, your pick list should not be one list in an order. It should be, we need one of the teams from this list on our alliance, and a number of teams on that will get you to have a first partner. And then we need another team on one of these lists. And those, you might have one other list that's like, is your third partner list. It's given that we have our attributes, our first partner has these attributes. We need this attribute for our third partner, and then you rank those teams based on whether they're above that threshold and then within that. You can have more lists than that. You can have your first partner list, and then each of them has a designation. So you would have your first partners, and they're all either green or yellow, an arbitrary thing. And then you have your green list third partners and your yellow list third partners. So it's us plus green, we need a team from this list. Us plus yellow, we need a team from this other list, in that order. You definitely want to have more than one list in most games, because if everybody's trying to do the same thing, a lot of games don't reward that. What you get to do in between qualification matches and playoff matches is throw off some of the shackles that are inherent in the things rewarded in qualification matches. I prefer games where the things that are rewarded in qualification matches are the things that are rewarded in playoff matches. It's never going to be perfect, but closer is better in my estimation. Let's take Crescendo, 2024's game, as an example. The trap was just for ranking points. Otherwise, you would get those points. You could get those points easier, quicker, or a percentage of those points, reasonably high percentage of those points, easier or quicker. So rankings did not necessarily correlate super strongly to the list that you would pick from. It's never perfect, but you got to a point in later Crescendo where this was more interesting as a commentator for Chezy Champs, that the game kept evolving. Like it was more interesting to watch each match to see how teams would pick on different parts of the game to value them. But we saw at Chezy Champs, even the teams that were good at doing the trap didn't in playoffs. It just became this vestigial thing. Like we could focus on anything else because this is worth only ranking points. And you have to consider that whatever list you come up with, especially if you get into these complicated lists, your list is not going to be your partner's list. They look at different things, they sort them in different ways. If your lists are identical, the game is it's probably a case of the game being so blinkeredly simplistic as to like obviate any need for actual match strategy. 2017, for example, or it's an event where there's just a hard cutoff, and it's just like, yep, there are teams that can perform the actions that are necessary to win matches, and there are some teams who can't. And there isn't anything more that we're going to learn by spending more time making this list. Yeah. So, what's the question?
So, kind of going back a moment, what does an ideal pitch counting list of questions look like?
So the question is, what does an ideal pit scouting list of questions look like? Most years you are going to want to know the actual physical dimensions of the robot base. This year, crescendo, it mattered slightly less, but a lot of years you have to coordinate an end game or an auto or something with your partners, where if they perform at the same level and they're just smaller, that's great. 2019 was an example of this, being able to get up onto the HAB level 3 and fit another robot on. So physical size, this is a 2010 specific thing. It's a value add, a very minor value add. I work for Swerve Drive Specialties, but compatible elements of if you are using some of the same things that we're using on our robot, say a COTS Swerve Drive system, we might have extra spares of those components. It can be something like we use. There are a lot of teams that are switched from the SB50 battery connectors to SB120s. You might note, it might be something that you care about, whether you are able to swap batteries with them, because if they have a lot and you don't, or vice versa, that could be something that would matter. The list, the pit scouting list, I try not to think of it as a list of questions. Best practices that I've heard from other people and have done a little bit is you want to have your pit scouting list, the information that you're getting from pit scouting, be things that you can measure yourself. It's not an indictment of teams that they are bad at self-evaluation. Everybody's bad at it. It's hard. That's why teams put so much effort into getting better at it. If you ask a team how many game pieces they can score, that number isn't right. It's often the answer that's often given is a band that is around how they do when everything's working, and that's not necessarily the information that you can really use. So pit scouting, what you want to find out is some of those things that I talked about earlier in the presentation that you can use to differentiate teams. So check to see build and wiring quality. But yeah, I don't have a list. I haven't made one in a couple of years. Pit scouting is a whole thing. Like we've waxed and waned as a community and as a team about how we do it, whether we do it even at all. There were a couple of years in FRC where the prevailing wisdom was just don't. Like the games that were 2017, 2018, maybe not 20. So 2018, okay, 2018 Power Up, you had buddy climb systems, teams that had buddy climb systems. You would want to pit scout whether their robot frame was able to get over your forks, your buddy climb forks. It could be a specific attribute of your robot. Actuate them to see how they moved from the 4 inches off the floor to the 12 inches off the floor. So that's something that's more akin to what you can do at a practice field in between events, or at an event if you've got a full practice field or elements that are actually useful for evaluating this stuff. Finding those robot interactions, if there's a game that has robot to robot contact or leverage applied to each other, that's something that you're probably only going to get out of pit scouting. And then so the more minor version of that is like the frame perimeter or robot width. So like in Charged Up, we would see how wide teams' robots were to see if we could all fit on the charge station nicely, or if it was going to be a squeeze and kind of unfortunate and kind of unpleasant to deal with. I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for that, partially because I think that we're kind of at the point where there isn't a great answer for that. What I do for pit scouting questions is I try to just find out from the team how their season went. If they've got the time to answer, like one of the advantages that I have from all of the events and all of the years that I've done this is pulling information out of answers that aren't the literal things that they're saying. So sometimes the best way to do pit scouting or to find out information is to do it obliquely rather than directly. Rather than asking, like, does your robot disconnect all the time? Ask, how'd build season go? And then depending on which things were real struggles for them, you should be able to see from that whether they were able to overcome those struggles or if those are still extant. Yeah, pit scouting is not simple, and it's not easy. It's in the dreaded quadrant, and it has part of what's kept it in that quadrant is because it's difficult, and because getting the actual information that you want out of it it's not just difficult to figure out what you want, it's also difficult to get that information out of teams. Because not a lot of value has come out of pit scouting for a lot of teams in a lot of years, as I was saying, there are games where basically nothing that you get out of pit scouting are you going to use, and there are teams for whom even if the game rewards it, your robot doesn't do anything in particular with that information. Your team can't do anything in particular with specific robot attribute information. It has also become relegated to younger members of teams, members who aren't as experienced. So the quality of that information and the ability for each person taking that information to be able to improve the process, that's like the decreased value put in it has made it so that the value has continued to be decreased. I think there's probably a kind of good conversation that could happen about it, but it hasn't happened yet. Pit scouting is basically now at the point where it's look at the robot, and if you know what you're talking about, does it look like they're going to break? That's kind of what it's turned into. We might get better at it in the near future. We might not. But 2023 at district championships, it was a year where it turned into one list, but it was also a year where that list wasn't just our list for 2023 district championship was broken into two lists that just existed on one line. So at a certain point in this list, it changes from teams that just score a whole bunch of game pieces and are compatible with us to second round teams. Teams that, given the partner that we're with, are able to fill the role that's required for that alliance to be the best that it can possibly be. So we knew we had performed really well in qualifications at 2023 district championships. I think 4 ranking points in every match on the first day. So, and a lot of other teams were. There were scores of ranking points to go around. Everybody near the top of the rankings was dropping very, very few points. But we did know before we got to alliance selections that we would be the number 1 seed. So prior to that, we knew that it was a high chance that we'd be the number 1 seed. So what we started looking at was so we didn't know yet that there would be supercharged nodes. And we were actually very worried about that. Sorry, I should have muted myself. We were actually very worried about that going into district championships, because what we came up with for our pick list meeting was, hey, there exists the possibility that more than one alliance at this event can fill the grid. Yikes. So we have to be able to not only fill the grid, we also have to be able to maximize the other points during the match. So then our list changed significantly. We initially had it pretty much sorted by game pieces. But we knew it would be seated really high, so when we knew that we could pick them, we picked Bare Metal 2046. So they're the second team on our list. So between us, we had a bump side auto that could score 3 game pieces, had a couple of times, and a smooth side auto that could score 3 game pieces, did most of the time. So then, to get close to a perfect score, as close as we could, we were gunning for that perfect score, that 193. We were 1 point off from getting it in a qualification match. And, well, we'll talk about it a little bit later. But then we knew that our third partner had to be able to get mobility and score their game piece and engage with the charge station. So many teams that were initially pretty highly ranked on our list moved off of our list because we didn't need them to be able to score these, to be able to do these other auto routines, the auto routines on the side of the charge station. There wouldn't be a match in playoffs where we were trying to optimize for an alliance that didn't have us on smooth side and Bare Metal on bump side. Like, that was locked in. If one of us broke, we weren't trying to get a perfect score in the match where we weren't playing with one of our top 2 teams. This gets into the don't try to solve 8 problems, solve 1 problem. So as picking went down, the teams are out there. There's the MC coming around and checking with everybody. This is pre rules that haven't happened but have happened at some off-season events. So there's one alliance representative out there for each team. Everybody's going around. They're inviting, they're accepting or declining the invitation, and everybody's crossing off the list. This is a picture of the list that we had in the stands. So this was, we had our own little huddle with Bare Metal, and Bare Metal had their own little huddle, and then the people on the field had direct communication to those huddles. So everybody's crossing off the teams as they're picked. Because don't pick teams that have been picked. It's you will have spent effort in doing something that just isn't going to work. You want to avoid that as much as possible. And during alliance selections, it is mostly a straightforward thing. I do remember there's a field of championships in 2010 where in the second round, the teams tried to pick a team that had actually it wasn't a team that had even picked. They tried to pick an alliance captain. They had not had their lists congruent with what was happening on the field. So it can happen. So some of the nuts and bolts, you do have to do the straightforward stuff. When a team number is called, you strike it off your list. Because accept or decline, you can't invite them. And when they're alliance captains. It's not a loophole. And it's not a loophole, this whole concept of we're going to finally be the team that is so clever that we're going to pick the second alliance captain after they've picked some teams because they haven't accepted or declined an invitation. So, I mean, I don't think anybody's actually tried it because of how, like, it's obvious what's going to happen. But from a practical standpoint, the scorekeeper with the FMS in front of them, there's no option to do that. Like if you tried to stand there and insist that this team hasn't accepted or this team hasn't declined an invitation, they're eligible for us to pick, the response will be, we have no way to make that happen. Pick somebody else. That's the practical thing. Fine. Whatever. Maybe there can be a clause in the rules that describes this. What I am interested in getting declines recorded in FMS. I think it'd be really cool if that happened because trying to look at events that I wasn't at, looking at the alliance selections, sometimes I want to know how did this happen? Did this team get invited and declined, or were they not performing? From 10,000 feet, I don't know these answers. So declines are part of alliance selection. I think they should be recorded. But also, not from a practical standpoint, but yeah, you can't invite another alliance captain. I mean, I guess if you wanted the gentlest way, it might increase their chance of winning the event if it were possible for them to just be added to your alliance. But they've already put in a lot of effort to form their own alliance, so pretty disrespectful to tell them, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you just won the event with us? So you're crossing off teams, and then we get to this was later in it, and I think we noticed that two of the teams that we wanted were right next to each other, or were right next to each other in the rankings. And the new thing with backup robots was in effect for 2023 district championships. So we were also looking at the overall team rankings. So we picked 948 because 1983 was the next highest ranked team available. So after our first match, we were able to call in the backup. So we had the next two teams on our list, on our alliance. So 948 and 1983, they were both able to do these things that we cared about. They scored above a certain number of game pieces that put them on our, we'll be able to make these matches work for us in Teleop. And they had the auto mode that we needed, and they could balance with us. So we did have a perfect auto in one of our playoff matches. It's the one we lost because our SB50 batter connector came disconnected during that match, midway through Teleop, like 29 tenths. So refer back again to the previous presentation, systems check systems check yourself before you wreck yourself. That was a harsh lesson that, you know what, so many of us had learned before, but it is, it is always possible to get to a point where everything's working, so you don't need to check things. And we got to that point, and it cost us. It cost us in that match. We lost. We went down into the lower bracket. So now we only had one match. Um, we didn't have a loss to play with. And as a side note, it did also cost us the perfect match. Like we were on track to fill the grid. We had an auto that had all the game pieces scored, and the engage, and all the mobilities. And if everybody's robot runs, we would also have gotten the end game, triple balance. So no 193s. I think there might technically have been one, but the next time that anybody played matches, supercharging was there. So it was a completely different game. But thinking about this, how to apply this to other games is there are things that your alliance is going to have to be able to do in playoffs. They're not exactly the same as qualifications, but there are only a certain number of actions that can be taken. There are points that you can't get at certain points in the match. There are points that like don't overlap. So when we were going through and ranking our teams and thinking of what our alliance was going to look like, we did not need the next highest game piece scoring team because there was an upper limit. We would score however many, and 2046 would score however many. So then we only needed 27 minus those two numbers of game pieces scored by our third partner. Any more than that is actually not worth anything. So then it has to be all of the other things that they're able to do that that can contribute to the best possible matches. We never got to the perfect score with that alliance, but specifically about that, when we lost that match, which was 100% our fault and felt awful, we went to the lower bracket, which meant that we were playing on the blue side of the field. The blue side charge station at the NW District Championships was a little bit weirder when it came to balancing. So the team that was doing the auto engage, 1983, we all tried. They tried, and we tried to tune their balance so that it would engage instead of just dock. Tried a couple of times. Just you only have so many opportunities to tweak stuff and check it on the field. You're doing these in elimination matches. So we got to the point where it was docking. It's like, we can't go for the perfect score. We just have to win matches. So it had worked out that a couple of some of the other alliances that were formed in playoffs did get within 2 and 1 pieces of a full grid. So it wasn't an entirely phantom. It wasn't entirely a problem of our own creation to try to get to this perfect score. Other alliances got pretty close, but we're missing one of these elements. But in a practical sense, in the matches that we played, we could not optimize that aspect of it because sometimes you just can't get your robots to interact with the field properly. Don't want to get too tied down into it. So for Chezy, this year, they were using pretty much the 2025 Alliance selection rules as we understand them. So 3 people go down to the field, and you have 45 seconds to make every pick. Now, when it comes to preparing our pick list for this event, everything in Crescendo would point you toward you should have more than one list. You need very different robots to do very different tasks. But what we knew Saturday night was we would be first or second seed. And if we weren't first seed, then Mechanical Advantage was going to be first seed. So when we talked to them early on Sunday morning, it was, what do we need for our third part? What's this alliance going to look like? So then we were looking at the things in Crescendo that could make the difference in these matches. What's the theory of the case for our alliance? How are we winning matches? So our auto and 6328's auto did amp side and source side. Source, that was the word I was looking for way earlier when I was talking about the human players. Amp side and source side autos that did the center line effectively. We battled other fast teams to those game pieces. And so what we really valued was somebody who had an auto that did the 3 notes in front of the podium, the ABC notes to us, because points. All things being equal, like those auto points, yeah, you will eventually get to 5 points for an individual note, but not at a rate of 1 note to 5 points, only an auto. And if you miss them or you don't pick them up, if you don't do them in auto, then you have to take time away from telling. Anyway, a big thing was we cared a lot about auto, and we cared about what our alliance was going to do. Was 6328 was going to play cleanup, 2910 was going to pass. And then our third partner, depending on what the match looked like, was either going to pass with 2910, especially in the case of where we were being defended by the other alliance, or that third partner was going to defend the other alliances, like source pickup, whether they were passing or not. So had to be above the threshold of auto capability, and above the threshold of capable of passing, capable of playing good defense, possibly. So locked out this set of this list has notes on it. Locked out is I don't remember exactly what state this list when in the competition these notes were in, but it was either right before alliance selection or early in alliance selection. So locked out is like their alliance captains, or they're picked really early. They're not available. Like we can have them ranked approximately where we would rank them, but we wouldn't spend any more time figuring out exactly if 9442 is above 604, for example, because that's a problem for match strategy. That's not a problem for pick list. There's no practical difference between those two. They're not going to be on our alliance. So from this, we got 2 teams that we and our partner were really happy with, 670 and 5199, both next to each other on the list. And I mean, we had sequential picks, so that made sense. And there were some things that made this this particular version of picking, and I am not lambasting 2910, I am not blaming 6328, but what we had for this event was 3 people each on the field, on calls to their scouts in the stands and at home for 6328. And there was a pick timer. So getting everybody coordinated to get these picks in. There were elements added that I think we collectively, and on 2910 I'm going to advocate for this, we should figure out what the heck we're going to do so that that timer doesn't expire. Unless you want to do that. I don't know. I've almost talked myself into some scenarios where you wouldn't mind being skipped, but I think structurally you want to avoid butting up against the end of that timer. So there are some steps that we can take to get to that. What I think, this is my advocacy time, what I think it should be is the 3 people on the field have all the information for picking. If they really need something from the stands, they can initiate a conversation back to them, but they're the ones with the timer on them, and you have 3 people down there. They better have enough information to be able to make picks. They should know what your match strategies are going to be. They should know who's out there, and they should know their capabilities. This is also an opportunity for your scouts, whether you've had scouting shifts or not, to not be fully engaged. The same way that like your drive team during alliance selections isn't on, maybe now is an opportunity for you to not have your match scouts on during another part of the competition. FRC events take a lot out of you, and you can always do more work. But the only way to be effective is if you are actually able to focus and if you're actually rested to be able to use your brain. So I think it would work if you set the 3 people up on the field, set them up in a way to be successful, and then said, great, go do it. Kind of the same way that we do with drive teams. Like we do a lot of preparation before the match, and then they have to go do something. And there's always going to be an amount of stuff that happens at an event that you aren't directly in control of. So alliance selections moving more towards that, I'm not opposed to it. And at champs, and at Chezy champs, because they did 4-team alliances, you got an MC out there, you got 3 people per team. You're going at the end of alliance selection, there are going to be up to 96 people, 97 with the MC, 97 people on the field. It's got crowded. So what I really liked, so I've seen this implemented at more than 3 off seasons this year, but 3 that tried it in a couple of different ways. So first, we're at Battle Cry. Battle Cry at WPI has a whole thing where every team plays in playoffs. So we had 15 alliances, or we had 14 alliances of 3. No, hold on. We had 14 alliances of 4 and 1 alliance of 3 because it just worked out that they weren't divisible by 4. But everybody plays in playoffs. And we wanted to do something with making that alliance selection less unwieldy. So the last round at Battle Cry is random, just 3 primary things why it's random. The last round at Battle Cry. 1, time. You don't have to ask each of them. You just hold a hat out to them and they pick one out. 2, if you're the last team picked, it's an off season. Like, not everybody needs to have a referendum on like how they were performing that weekend, and just trying to ease that sort of being the last pick thing. And there was definitely a third reason. Anyway, so to form this, because we knew we had so many alliances, another problem that we were trying to solve was this whole weird, awkward dance of the alliance representative on the field and then the whole strategy scouting team in a huddle with some way of communicating to them. Are they on Slack or Discord or video call, whiteboards, whatever? So what we did at Battlecry was we just set up little, basically queuing boxes all the way around the arena. So it wasn't just the field for every alliance. And we said, bring your whole scouting team, as many people as you want. So we didn't limit it to 3. So, just everybody would go over, and the team that was picking had 45 seconds. They'd pick. If they accepted, they'd come over, and then they'd form this giant clump. And they were just there. The idea was to just, the people who are making the decisions, it's going to be the same people anyway. So just get them out there. But at IRI, it was closer to, well, they went down to 3 people per alliance because they wanted to be able to fit everybody out on the field when they had formed the alliances. I assume. I think that's part of the reason for 3 people. It can also be other reasons. I mean, it could certainly get unwieldy. You can consider your scouting team that you want input on your pick to be all 24 people or part of that, and then you have these big clumps and uneven number of people on different teams. You can get into weird power dynamics. But Three people on the field make the decision. Uh, it might actually be pretty sweet. So part of what can help when you're doing that. So I want to look at the Chezy list a little bit as I talk about really theoretical concepts here. You should not have as much confidence in your ranking of teams as a list that looks like this implies that you have. So this I'm talking about this in a couple of ways. So a question was asked about how do you differentiate these teams that all at a certain point are giving you the same amount of the same numbers if they all sort of fit in the same categorization, right? They're each able to do these couple of things that you need a team to do. Say they all have the same auto capabilities, they all have the same game capabilities, and they all score about the same number of game pieces per match. So on the one hand, we did talk about how it's useful to be able to take differentiators out of that, but also sort of I opened a doorway into my larger point about this, which is don't differentiate between them. Don't be so confident as to say this team is going to be better on our alliance than this team. The chances are that you're wrong. Chances are very, very, very good that your assessment is not 100% accurate. It's hard to project exactly what teams are able to do, and even within that, okay, so you have this band of teams that you're comparing. One of them scores 6.2 game pieces per match, and another scores 6.4. And you've got all 12 qualification matches of data for that, which means that over the course of those 12 qualification matches, they've scored, what does that work out? It's like 1 or 2 total game pieces more. That is another game piece. It is technically more. But in a single match, those two robots are scoring the same number of game pieces. Almost everything that you're collecting when it comes to scoring data is integers. So when you're comparing teams and their numbers are close enough that there isn't an actual difference in the number of game pieces that they're scoring in an individual match, from your perspective, from what they're able to contribute to your alliance, there might not actually be a difference. So when you are fighting over lists with your partner, when you are comparing lists with your partners on the field, whatever thing it is that either of you thinks is more important that moves one team up out of the pack, I actually think that by itself is probably enough. It might even be wrong, but any other individual thing that you could have to pick any of the other teams out of the pack might also be wrong. So I like the timer so much. It is such a good idea because part of this is my doomerism. I think that we were near a tipping point. The accepted wisdom as early as 2025 or 2026 may have been this alliance selections is a part of the competition where you have no time limit. So you should do absolutely everything that you can to be as confident as possible in your decision. You go to each team's pits and you do a final run through with their robot. You re-watch every team that you're considering match video with all of the stakeholders. You like in the moment that you're going to pick. I think that teams would have convinced themselves that this was the right course of action to take, that this is an opportunity to pour a lot of resources in because there's no structure that prevents you from doing so. So preemptively, I think, it's a good thing we got that because the high profile long match selections that we've seen in recent years, and there were, my old team 190 has a story of like an event from 2005 with an especially protracted alliance selections, where one pick took an amount of time that led to the MC going into the crowd and asking people by putting the mic in their face, what team do you think they should pick? And then that team that person in the crowd said was what that team picked. So it's not unheard of. I haven't seen a lot of events with it, but it's a pain point. And I wasn't worried so much about solving those problems of these individual long alliance selections. There were somewhat graceful ways to make it so that the event mostly ran okay. It just put more onus on the volunteers. Lots of people had to skip a lot of lunches over the course of many events that have had long alliance selections. But I think that putting the timer on is going to be really useful for teams to just get better at picking. Because you aren't, I think, by and large, you aren't actually going to make a better selection if you take twice as long to do it. Once you're there in alliance selections, you have all of the information that you're going to need. You have in the past as well. That's not changing in between previous events and future events. You should try to get a little bit more information so you have a slight more confidence. But I think that it will help you a lot if you have an honest understanding of how confident you should be, which is not that much. Like, look at the list of teams. So we had the unique situation in Chezy where the top 2 seeds were locked. So we got an additional benefit to picking 6328 in that we knew a lot earlier what our alliance was going to be. But from a standpoint of how would our alliance perform in playoffs, there may not have been a huge difference between 6328 cleaning up and some of the other teams that were at that event cleaning up. But they were certainly above the threshold of good enough to do it. So once you're above that threshold of this theory of the case of your alliance, like how are you going to win matches? If you can, you should get to the point where you're confident in saying this team that we can pick as the first team. With them, we can win matches, we can win the event. If you can say that about more than one team, that's really good. You should have a number of teams above that threshold that is the number of teams that will be possible for you to pick. And that gets complicated with declines, so some lower seeds have to have really expansive lists for that first partner. And it's harder in that way. But that's what you should be thinking of. There just needs to be a cutoff where below this line, you have to have a different answer to the question, how is our alliance going to win this event? So then once you have that one answered, then you have to answer the second question. It's why I talk about thresholds so much, because my concept of the confidence that you need to go through alliance selections and get out of alliance selections with a positive outcome is you need to just have a set of teams that tick the box, where the box is the question, can you win the event with this team on your alliance? You should have as many teams as you can that fulfill that criteria. And in between those teams, I don't think it matters that much. If you are on that bare edge, where it is going to be between these two teams that are the only ones capable of doing it, I think that question actually is, that question doesn't get harder until you're below that line. Because then in that moment, if you have no teams above the threshold, then you have to consider how you ask a different question. Like, given that our initial concept of how to win this event is not compatible with an alliance that we can form, how do we win the event another way? But most teams at most events, low or high seed, I think are missing out on the ability of forming the alliance that answers just that first question. Can we win this event with a team from this list and a team from this list? I think that's the question that you need to be asking, because if you are trying to answer another question before that one, like what are the teams that score the most and what are the teams that defend the best? You could ask that question. And I think a lot of teams ask that question when they're forming their alliances. And that leads to a lot of matches where their first partner scores a bunch of points and their second partner defends pretty well and their alliance can't win the match. I think reframing it around what are the questions you're actually trying to answer is very important.
We do also have a question.
Yeah.
Were there any noticeable differences in how long teams took in selecting their second or third robot at any events using the new alliance selection?
So the question was, were there any differences in how long teams took to select their second or third partners at these events that were using timers? I was not tracking that. I know that there are people on that alliance selection committee that were, but mostly from what I noticed, no. The top half of the first round at those events, really fast. Like, you get intimations or direct information from the teams that are seated above you, what alliances they're going to form. So, like the number one seed, the number one seed at these events with timers that I was at, they just picked their team as soon as they were given the opportunity to pick a team. Like, there's no point in deliberating. There's no point in deliberating that in any circumstance, but especially now with the timer. Shout out Peachtree. That video. So one of our mentors, Brandon King, is a Georgia boy, and he was talking about what Peachtree Alliance selections looked like, because I hadn't seen them. I hadn't paid close attention to the actual alliance selections. And there's the video of the 2023 Georgia District Champion or Peachtree District Championship Alliance selections. Seek it out and watch it. It's a hoot. It's like a set of carnival games up there, because everybody was prepared for alliance selections to take forever. So they have like a wheel that they spin that has different things. The MCs they're fully prepared for alliance selections to turn into something that we don't anticipate seeing anymore with the new structure of alliance selections. But sorry, I got distracted. No, some teams took a little longer to make their second and third picks, but not. I don't think anybody went to the timer at Chezy Champs. I don't think anybody did it. Nobody did at Battlecry, and I don't think anybody did at IRI. Now, that is not proof positive that teams won't be skipped at official events next year if these rules stay pretty much as they are as we go into the season. Talking of confidence, off seasons are certainly one thing when it comes to picking. Chezy Champs and IRI especially are these high profile, like high competitive level off seasons. But they are still off seasons. Like a lot of teams, like our team didn't do quantitative scouting at Chezy Champs because we didn't bring our full contingent of people. We didn't do quantitative scouting at IRI because we brought an even smaller contingent of people. And that's true for a lot of teams. You're not doing your whole thing. You're not placing exactly the same value on it. Not a moral judgment, by the way. You can sometimes get to PNW the Pacific Northwest has this thing with off seasons where their off seasons, they treat everything I'm here now, I live here. The off seasons up here are a little too similar to district events for my liking. I think you should learn stuff at off seasons by trying stuff that you wouldn't at a district event. So I think there's more opportunity for a little more flexibility and elasticity there. But overall, regardless of how teams are treating it, uh, there will be skips in a system that's structured like this, where you can get skipped for going over your time. At official events, you should expect that to happen at some point. It's planned for a reason. Um, you're going to get to some team or some collection of teams is going to get to a point where they need the time to make the decision, or they get to a point where they can't differentiate between two teams and they aren't confident enough to make that pick. And but this wouldn't be the case between two teams. Sorry, I'm thinking of this as I'm going through it. So if they're trying to decide between, say, 3 or 4 teams, and they're confident that each of them is above the threshold, but they're also confident that they need a little more time to talk it through. If they are willing to sacrifice an unknown team from that group to have more confidence in the 3 that are available that will remain after that, then it might be worthwhile to have the discussion that you need to have in the extra time that you will get from the next team making a pick to have more clarity in that. I think that's you are inherently reducing your options by doing that. So you would be better served to be able to make those decisions within that timer and not have some of your options taken away from you. The advantage of being seated wherever you're seated. You shouldn't just give things up because it might work out. But if there is a discussion that you know you can complete in a minute and a half that you can't complete in 45 seconds, then there might be situations where getting skipped is actually the best thing to do. Structurally, I think you would be stronger overall if if you didn't put yourself in situations where that was the case. So, speaking of this, like these, by and large, teams at these events that we have seen have not had that much difficulty in reconciling their lists. So, with our list was similar enough to 6328s that when we got down to the teams that we were able to pick at the end of the second round and the beginning of the third round, within that 45 seconds, we said 670, you're good with that? Yeah, we're good with that. 22199, you're good with that? Yeah, we're good with that. Like, so consensus. So we talked about consensus in one of our previous pop-up presentations about what the first week of build season looks like. Consensus is, from a practical standpoint, I don't think that we are making a mistake by continuing down this path. So between the 2 alliances that are on the field that are making the second pick, and then the 3 that are making the 4th pick at events that do that, which is, it's so rare that let's solve one problem at a time. So you and your partner, your 6 people are going to be making a decision about the next team that you're adding to your alliance. You can maybe have more people than that. I don't recommend it. You each just need to get to the point where you say, I think that this decision can work for us. You can get to that answer really quickly if you both just agree on what the team is, and you both say, this is our first choice, let's go for it. That happens sometimes. Sometimes you're that simpatico. Other times it's this team is 4th on our list, but they're well above our threshold. We're happy if they're above on your list, then we're both happy. I think fighting a little bit too much about these granular decisions between teams That's why I talk about tiers and thresholds. Like, when you get to the point where there aren't these big differentiators, that's where this actually has way more value. You've got 45 seconds to make a decision. If you both have 3 teams above your threshold and they have 1 team in another tier above yours, or if you have, so, okay, imagine this reasonable scenario. Both of you have your second pick team list, and you have 4 teams left on it as you get back to wherever you are in the draft. You have 4 teams, you each have 4 teams left on it. And one of the teams on your list isn't on their list, and vice versa. So, okay, you're down to 3. On your list, your 3 teams are not just ranked 1, 2, 3 available. One of them is ranked 1, one of them is ranked 18, and one of them is ranked 20. Their list, they have those 3 teams that are left in the same grouping. Your best argument is we had this one team significantly outpacing these other teams. We saw something that we think was important. If everybody, it would all be easier if everybody thought the way that I think. That's not actually, that insightful. But if both teams are looking at it from the perspective of this small group of teams is above our threshold, then the one data point in favor of this one team over these others, that's enough. Because these 3 teams that we have, if we don't see a differentiator and you do, that's all that we need to have a collective confidence. Consensus, we both agree that we can win with this team. You like them way more than we do, that's fine. That's actually great. You don't need to win every tiny battle, especially when it comes to picking. Like, just get the teams that you will be able to win with into a group, and then say, we'll be able to do we will be able to do what we need to do with this team. You had a question?
With events basically all having instantly available full field VODs, would you advocate for incorporating VOD reviews into the scouting or pick list process?
So the question is, with almost all events having instantaneous match uploads to YouTube or wherever, would I recommend having match review as part of scouting match strategy, pick list, like integrating it into stuff? Yes, I would. I think that you will have questions that aren't answered by the data that you're already collecting, and you should find inflection points where, hey, this is a team that we think is going to be right at the top of our second pick list. And this is another team that we think is going to be right at these are teams that we think are going to be available when we're picking. And in this case, we think it does matter which one is above them. If you can find a specific question to answer, then you should watch matches for that. I would not recommend wholesale watching matches more than once to do more scouting that you just put into stuff. I think that you're quickly into diminishing returns on that. But if it's something that you discovered during the event that, hey, we really need to be recording this, like we haven't been tracking passing, and it's the first event that any of these teams are doing passing, then being able to find the answer to the question, hey, has this team passed ever? Yeah, somebody should go down that rabbit hole. But I think that, yes, with caution. Yes, you should use them, but only to answer specific questions. If it's part of your thing to just have another person watch every match and do data verification, that can work if you have the resources for it. But remember, you have a finite amount of energy, like each person. So don't think that you're going to get twice as much value out of watching a match twice. But Yeah, definitely. It's a very nice resource to have because I mean, look at if you look at previous championships, like uh, olden days, back when I was a kid, there weren't full field videos, so you had the camera people like spinning their cameras for cool shots and zooming in on compressors. Uh, then there were a couple of years where there just like isn't match video from championship divisions. Like 2011, one of them just doesn't have any. What the heck? 2012, they went all the way the other direction, and the playoffs for each division is just one YouTube video. So like on TBA, it's just time stamped to like each one, but you can just watch Archimedes playoffs. One YouTube video, just watch 35 straight minutes of it. It's so good. I really like that. And then there were a couple of fits and starts, high notes and high peaks and low valleys overall in like how VODs were doing. And then like 2013 and 2014, the best video of Einstein is like 973s or 1676s. These just teams that set up cameras in the stands. But by 2016, they had set up with the corner cams and each field at championship had the same frame around it. All of the cameras were like in the exact same spot. That was great. Then we get into modern era. Sorry. So, um, but remember when you're reviewing match video, not to try to answer questions that you can't answer with match video. Like, yeah, you can do the stats for nerds thing and get the specific frame on the YouTube video that a team crossed a line for. Like we did that for like auto timing. We tried to see if there was a practical difference between these teams going for the same notes in auto. But there's difficulty in doing stuff like that because what teams did in Crescendo, knowing what the auto timings were, was teams weren't really racing for the same notes that often in a lot of later season matches. It was just they're going to make it to this one and we're not, so we're just going to go to the next one because they can't get two notes before we get our first one if we go for the second one that they go for. There were still races certainly, but yeah, don't like blanket watch every qualification match again because it's so much time, even if you watch it at 2x speed. So one of the things that you need to do is math. I know. I can do a huge rant on the American school system, but you need to have a sense as early as you can whether you're going to be a captain. What are the chances that you're going to be? Does your match schedule feature a bunch of teams that contribute to the bonus ranking points or to the win ranking point, or does it not? And do you need to focus on boosting their and your ability to do that, or just getting the bonus ones for matches that don't go as predicted, like a team on the other side doesn't have the match that they would expect to, so you're just kind of capitalizing on things. But within the match schedule, you can look at and say, well, we know a couple of things about what needs to happen in these matches for ranking points. So don't have everybody go out there and so Crescendo, you could have all of your teams going out there and scoring non-amplified shots because you were focused on getting to the melody ranking point. And if you thought that your alliance couldn't do the amp fast enough to gain the point value out of doing full amplified cycles, then that might be your answer. Like you're not looking to win that match; you're just trying to get the bonus ranking point. You have to pick out these things that you care about and what you're able to do, and not just yours to figure out who's going to seed high. You have to look at other teams, like especially later in the event. I mean, definitely by the end of the first day, the rankings will have congealed somewhat. There's only so much that teams can move. There are only so many ranking points that they can earn or drop. So unless it's a game where everybody's unless it's a game where there are a lot of fours or a lot of twos, like the bonus ranking points are way too easy to get or way too hard to get. Um, Ranking points can only shift so much in a practical sense. So um, you do need to branch out. You need to have somebody or many somebodies analyzing more than just what's happening in your matches on the field to play robots. You have to figure out what's going to happen based on those results. So I didn't leave myself enough time to really get into what I think of OPR and EPA. I think that component OPR and component EPA are useful tools. But for me, the EPA of a team, that information gets overwritten in my mind as soon as I've watched a couple of matches of theirs. I don't think that there's a lot of insight to be gained from it on top of the other information that you're able to get. Like EPA says that this team is good. You watch them, they're good. Great. What has that actually told you for anything other than an event that you're not going to watch? So you do have to get more information about what you were able to do based on stuff that isn't happening at your events. Like a big example this year is or any year, is what is becoming the dominant way to win. If you are able to do that, you have to start to shift your strategy to doing that. Passing and cleanup or cycling or different areas of focus for games like Charged Up last year. We went from a score the most points strategy in week 1 to get the most pieces into the grid at our second competition in week 3. Focusing more on, we don't need to be winning championships. We don't need to be running our championships playoff match winning strategy in these qualification matches. The point is to get to there. So an issue with one number metrics is that they only describe team attributes. So a thing that I think is important that I listen to like weird NBA nerd podcasts. So they talk about this a lot when they talk about one number metrics and analytics. So EPA has a high correlation year to year. Like teams that were good, that had a good EPA in 2023 had a good EPA in 2024. But it is not because they had a good EPA in 2023 that they have a good EPA in 2024. They're both measuring underlying attributes. So trying to go backwards from that, trying to go from EPA, taking the EPA number and ascribing attributes from that is inherently what all of these one number metrics like push your brain to do, and that will lead you to terrible conclusions. So this is, you'll have to, again, forgive my horrible image manipulation here, and also my lack of labels. So leftmost is our pick list from 2023 district champs. Next to it is the top 24 teams by EPA at that event, then OPR, then what they were ranked. So there are a couple of like really wild swings here, and it starts to show up later in our pick list. But these are all describing different things. That's the point that I want to get across is you can't substitute one for another. And some games are just so wildly different, or in some games, this is exacerbated. Games with like stepwise functions like 2017 or timed scoring games like 2018 with the teeter-totters, like every 10,000 foot measurement is not giving you the answers that you're trying to find when you're asking the question, which teams should we pick? And so this is similar exercise, same order for Chezy Champs this year, Chezy Champs 2024. So you see a lot of teams kind of near where they're at, but these differences are significant. So one limitation, as I said before, EPA doesn't update after championships. So these are how well teams performed during the season. You do have to consider how they're performing at that event pretty highly. You should put a lot of stock in that. There are underlying attributes that they may be able to show, given the ability to focus for playoffs, but what teams have done before season long is not necessarily what they're doing at that event. There are lots of championships that have been swung based on this concept. Teams that have just stormed through their qualification tournaments, just dominating. But then at championships, the fields are slightly different, or the batch of game pieces is slightly different, or they just don't have it that weekend, whatever. They can come in with as much pedigree as you could possibly want, long-term and short-term. But if they're out there in the matches and they can't, and they're not actually scoring, then it doesn't matter what they did. And vice versa. Like, hey, this team made it to championship and they were first pick of the Sixth Alliance like twice. Like they score, like they seem like they've got their stuff together, but like they're not the highest performing. Well, at champs, they put it all together. Now they're the best team on this field. Like once you're there, you do have to consider more than just what they had shown going into the event. So when you're doing pre-scouting, whatever you're doing with it, to get you ready for this first couple of matches, you should have that information removed as soon as you have information to replace it with. Pre-scouting only tells you what teams used to be able to do. And there are some scenarios where that information is useful if you're at an event and a team has been playing a specific role that they hadn't been playing before, but you need them to play their old role. Sometimes that information is useful, but lots of times they can't play that role anymore, or that role no longer is the one that is actually going to be the thing that you need. You might also be stuck in the past, not just that team. So as you're going through alliance selection, you definitely need to have your own pick list as buttoned up and squared away as you can. You're checking off all the teams. You're making sure that you are simpatico with your partner and making the alliance that you want. You also need to pay attention to what your team collectively needs to pay attention to what the other alliances are. What are you going to be facing? So whatever they're doing, the first question is still, what can we do to win this match? Not what do we need to do to make them lose the match? I know it's zero-sum in playoffs for almost every game, every modern game certainly, where those questions do kind of come together and become one question. But I think that if you are focused on what you need to do to disrupt your opponents, there might be the case where you are disrupting them and you are definitely throwing them off their game. And they're still 40 points up on you because you aren't playing a game that's actually winning the match. You're just making their match making them less effective. Doesn't matter if you aren't also effective. So first, get to the point where you are making an effective match. So, yes. So I talked about this, like in both of the last couple of games when we were making our alliances for playoffs, it wasn't the three robots that score the most. Put them out on the field and score the most, because the games don't allow for that. Even games with recycling game pieces like 2022 or 2020 or these other games, or however you look at it, there are natural choke points on the field. There are incompatibilities in just being able to not be in each other's way to maximize your points. lots of teams that you are considering and that you're putting on your alliances were playing in qualification matches where they were able to do what they were able to score at their maximum. Their partners were able to work with them and didn't take away scoring opportunities from them, and their opponents were trying to stop them. Well, in a playoff match, that's probably not true for all three teams on your alliance. So what are they going to actually be able to do in a match with 5 other robots on the field that are all working in 2 specific strategies that are coordinated? That can sometimes really change what a team is able to do on the field. That's some of what I was thinking of when I was constructing this presentation about like what you need to do at events with scouting and strategy. No question? No questions from the chat? Okay, so thank you for watching this pop-up presentation, the second of this year. For those of you watching live, thanks for tuning in. For those of you watching not live, the other thing, feel free to poke around and, I don't know, make fun of how bad my and our lists are, or try to understand like what we were thinking when we were making these lists. Ask us some questions if there's something that doesn't make sense with some of our overall preparation or the things that I care about. Be prepared for 2025 for that timer. This talk of, just walk really slowly over to the MC. Sure. What are you getting out of that time? I maintain that teams do not make better alliance picks. They don't make better picking decisions by taking longer. After like a certain point of just double checking that the things that you think lead to the list still do, like you're kind of just spending time up there. So yes, be prepared for 2025. I advocate for the bulk of communication to just be contained within the field. I think it'd be very nice to get to that point. As far as scheduling goes, there won't be a presentation next week. My team has to do extra meetings next week we got to write some stuff. But I also don't know what the next presentation is going to be. Got to write it, got to figure it out. If people have suggestions, or I'm going through, I'm trying to look at like all of the presentations that people have made. So I'm going through 2056's conferences, ways to win, and the Capital City Classic ones, and I think I've watched every Karthik presentation. But if there are aspects of some of those presentations that aren't, I'll admit my limitations, that aren't like the super technical side of either mechanical or electrical or programming, like strategy stuff, yeah. I know some strategy stuff. I'm confident enough to ask the right questions to be able to answer those. But still taking suggestions. Pop-up presentations will return. Thank you for watching.